What would you do if you Googled the man you were falling in love with and discovered his mugshot on a criminal database? My name is Patricia, I'm 59 years old, and for 7 months I believed I was building a future with Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, a renowned cardiovascular surgeon who'd lost his wife to cancer and understood my pain like no one else. I was ready to invest $85,000 in his new medical clinic. I'd already wired $34,000 for equipment deposits and licensing fees. But one night, unable to sleep, I did something I should have done months earlier. I searched his name with one extra word: arrest. What appeared on my screen shattered everything I believed and launched an investigation that would expose not just one con artist, but an entire network of fake doctors preying on women across America. This is the story of how a Google search at 2 a.m. turned me from a trusting girlfriend into the woman who helped the FBI dismantle a medical romance fraud ring that had stolen over $12 million from victims in 38 states. Thank you for being here. I believe this story will help you or someone you love recognize professional romance scams and the red flags we all need to know. So this is the perfect moment. Hit that like button and subscribe. You guarantee all the next stories without having to search for them. Now, let's begin. I met Dr. Jonathan Reynolds on a dating app called Elite Singles in January 2024, 18 months after my husband David died from complications related to diabetes. David and I had been together for 34 years. High school sweethearts who built a life in Portland, Oregon. After he died, I felt like I was drowning in silence. Our children were grown with families of their own. The house felt enormous and empty. My daughter Rebecca convinced me to try online dating. Mom, you're only 59. You have decades of life ahead. Dad wouldn't want you to be alone forever. I resisted for months, but the loneliness eventually won. I created a profile emphasizing that I wasn't looking for casual dating. I wanted genuine connection, intellectual compatibility, someone who understood loss. Jonathan's profile appeared in my matches within days. His photos showed a distinguished man in his early 60s with graying temples and kind eyes. He wore scrubs in some photos, a white doctor's coat in others. His profile was detailed and thoughtful. Cardiovascular surgeon with 28 years of experience, currently working with Doctors Without Borders in Syria, widowed 3 years ago when his wife Margaret died from breast cancer, passionate about humanitarian medicine and classical music. His first message wasn't a generic, "Hey," or superficial compliment. Instead, he wrote, "Patricia, I was moved by what you wrote about loss creating a different kind of wisdom. I lost my wife to cancer 3 years ago, and I found that most people either avoid the topic entirely or treat grief like a problem to be solved. But you described it as something that changes you fundamentally without destroying you. That perspective is rare and beautiful." I read that message 5 times. Someone understood. Someone didn't need me to move on or stay positive. Someone recognized that grief transforms you into a different version of yourself, and that's okay. We messaged for 2 weeks before our first phone call. His voice was warm, educated, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Vaguely British, maybe Australian? He explained he'd trained at medical schools in London and Sydney before settling in the United States. When I asked why he was on an American dating site if he was currently in Syria, he laughed gently. "Because I'm coming home, Patricia. My contract with Doctors Without Borders ends in 4 months. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent enough time in war zones. I want to build a life with someone who understands that medicine is a calling, but it shouldn't be everything. I want companionship, travel, quiet mornings with coffee and conversation. I want what I lost when Margaret died." His honesty was disarming. We talked for 3 hours that first call, about our late spouses, our children, our careers. I'd been a high school English teacher for 30 years, our dreams for whatever time we had left. He asked thoughtful questions about my interests, remembered details from our text conversations, and shared vulnerable moments about his grief journey. "The worst part wasn't the funeral or the first year," he said quietly. "It was realizing that I'd built my entire identity around being Margaret's husband and Sarah's father. When Margaret died and Sarah moved to Boston for her career, I didn't know who I was anymore. That's why I took the Doctors Without Borders assignment, to remember that I'm also a physician who can make a difference. But now I'm ready to remember that I'm also a man who wants partnership and love. I understood completely. I'd been David's wife and the kids' mom for so long that becoming just Patricia felt like learning a new language. By February, we were talking daily. Morning texts, lunch break calls, evening video chats. Or rather, attempted video chats. The connection in Syria was terrible, he explained. We'd connect on Zoom or FaceTime, but the video would freeze immediately, leaving only audio. The internet infrastructure in conflict zones is barely functional, he said apologetically. I promise, when I'm back in the States, you'll see me clearly. For now, I hope my voice is enough. It was enough. His voice became the best part of my day. He'd describe his work, emergency surgeries on civilians injured in the conflict, training local medical staff, the exhaustion and fulfillment of humanitarian medicine. He'd ask about my day teaching Shakespeare to teenagers who thought literature was irrelevant. He made me laugh, think, and feel seen. In March, he started talking specifically about his return to the United States. I'm not going back to hospital practice, he explained. The bureaucracy, the insurance nightmares, the corporate medicine culture, I'm done with all that. I want to open a private clinic focused on underserved communities. Sliding scale fees. No one turned away for inability to pay. It's what Margaret and I always dreamed of doing. That sounds beautiful, I said. Where are you thinking of opening it? Actually, I've been researching Portland. Excellent medical infrastructure, underserved neighborhoods that need quality healthcare, and... He paused. You're there. I'd like to build my next chapter near you, Patricia. If you're open to that. My heart raced. This wasn't just online romance anymore. This was a man making concrete plans that included me in his future. I'd like that very much, I said. Over the next few weeks, Jonathan sent me detailed plans for his clinic, photos of potential locations, business proposals, medical equipment lists, staffing budgets. He was applying for medical licenses, negotiating with equipment suppliers, setting up business accounts. He involved me in every decision, asking my opinion on clinic names, logo designs, even paint colors for the waiting room. You're going to be part of this, he said warmly. Not just as my partner in life, but as someone who understands serving communities. Your teaching career proves you care about people others might overlook. I want that perspective in how we build this clinic. I felt valued in ways I hadn't since David died. Jonathan didn't just want a girlfriend. He wanted a collaborator, a thought partner, someone whose insights mattered. Then came the first request for money. It was mid-April, 3 months into our relationship. Jonathan called, his voice stressed. Patricia, I'm in a complicated situation. The medical license application requires a bond payment, essentially insurance that proves I have the financial stability to operate a clinic. It's $12,000, and it needs to be paid within 48 hours or I lose my place in the application queue and have to restart the entire process, which could delay opening by 6 months. Why can't you pay it? I asked, concerned. My assets are temporarily frozen. When Margaret died, there were estate complications, inheritance disputes with her family, investment accounts that got tangled in probate. My lawyer is working to resolve it, but it could take weeks. I can't wait that long without losing the license application. I'll repay you the moment my accounts are accessible, probably within the month. I hesitated. $12,000 was significant. But this was for his medical license, for the clinic, for the future we were building together. How would I send it? Wire transfer to the licensing board's account. I'll email you the details, account number, routing information, everything. Patricia, I hate asking this. But you're the only person I trust, and this clinic represents everything I want our future to be. The appeal to trust, to partnership, to shared future, it worked. I went to my bank the next day and initiated a wire transfer for $12,000 to an account listed under Medical Licensing Board of Oregon. Jonathan called immediately after the transfer cleared, his relief palpable. "Patricia, you've saved everything. I can't express how much this means. The moment my accounts are unfrozen, I'm repaying you with interest. You've invested in our future, and I'll never forget that." For 72 hours, I felt like a hero, a partner, someone essential to the man I was falling in love with. Then came the next emergency. Equipment suppliers required deposits. Then licensing fees for controlled substance prescriptions. Then building inspection costs. Then staff recruitment expenses. Each request was accompanied by detailed explanations, official-looking documents, and emotional appeals about how these were the final hurdles before we could finally be together. By June, I'd wired $34,000 across 9 different transactions. My retirement savings were significantly depleted, but Jonathan's promises were concrete. 2 more weeks and I'll be in Portland. 1 more payment and the clinic opens. Just 1 more hurdle and we can start our life together. But something started nagging at me. Why did every solution create a new problem? Why were all these payments going to different accounts rather than one official business account? Why, after 4 months of planning, did the clinic opening keep getting delayed? One night in late June, unable to sleep, I did something I'd been avoiding because I was afraid of what it might reveal. Was I about to discover a truth that would destroy everything I'd believed? The investigation was about to begin. The insomnia that night was different from the usual widow's sleeplessness. It wasn't grief keeping me awake. It was doubt. I lay in bed at 2 a.m., replaying conversations with Jonathan, analyzing the pattern of requests, questioning why a successful surgeon with decades of experience needed a recently widowed teacher to fund his medical license and clinic. I got up, made tea, opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. I typed, "Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, cardiovascular surgeon," into Google. Pages of results appeared, news articles about heart surgery advances, medical journal publications, hospital staff directories. But none of them were my Jonathan. The Dr. Jonathan Reynolds who'd published in the Journal of Cardiac Surgery was Black and based in Atlanta. The Dr. Jonathan Reynolds who worked at Mayo Clinic was in his 30s. The Dr. Jonathan Reynolds who'd won awards for pediatric cardiology was a woman. I refined my search, Dr. Jonathan Reynolds Doctors Without Borders Syria. No results. I tried Dr. Jonathan Reynolds Humanitarian Surgeon. Nothing that matched. My hands trembled as I typed the search I'd been avoiding, Dr. Jonathan Reynolds Margaret Wife Cancer. No obituaries, no memorial pages, no trace of a Margaret Reynolds married to a cardiovascular surgeon. So I decided to check his background online. I opened a new tab and searched, Jonathan Reynolds arrest. And there it was. 3rd result down. A mugshot database entry from 2019. The photo showed a man who looked vaguely like Jonathan's profile pictures. Similar age, similar build, but the resemblance was superficial. More importantly, the arrest record told a story that shattered everything. Jonathan Marcus Reynolds, arrested March 2019. Charges: wire fraud, identity theft, theft by deception. Convicted November 2019. Sentenced to 4 years. Florida State Prison. Released on parole August 2022. My vision blurred. I clicked through to the full criminal record. Jonathan Marcus Reynolds had been arrested for running investment scams, posing as a financial advisor, defrauding elderly clients of over $300,000. This wasn't his first offense. He had 2 prior convictions for fraud dating back to 2008 and 2014. I opened another browser tab with shaking hands and uploaded one of Jonathan's profile photos to a reverse image search. The results appeared instantly. The same photo appeared on at least 20 different profiles across dating sites, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Dr. Michael Harrison, in Seattle. Dr. David Chen, in Chicago. Dr. Robert Martinez, in Dallas. All doctors. All widowers. All with tragic backstories. The photo actually belonged to a real physician, Dr. Andrew Sullivan, a cardiologist in Boston who'd posted a public warning on his practice's website. My professional photos have been stolen and used in romance scams. If someone using my image contacts you requesting money, please report it to local authorities. I am happily married and do not use dating apps. I sat at my kitchen table as dawn broke, staring at evidence that the man I'd been falling in love with for 6 months didn't exist. The voice on the phone belonged to someone, probably Jonathan Marcus Reynolds, the convicted fraudster. But the photos, the medical credentials, the humanitarian work, the dead wife, the future clinic, all lies. I felt nauseous. How had I been so stupid? I was an educated woman, a teacher who prided myself on critical thinking. I'd raised 2 smart, successful children. I'd managed a household, navigated my husband's medical crises, survived grief. How had I missed such obvious red flags? The answer, I realized, was that I'd wanted to believe. Jonathan had identified exactly what I needed: validation that my grief was valid, partnership that respected my intelligence, purpose beyond just existing, and he'd provided it in carefully measured doses. The financial requests were secondary to the emotional manipulation. I didn't send money because I was gullible. I sent money because I was invested in a relationship that felt real. At 7 a.m., my daughter Rebecca called for our usual morning check-in. I answered, and immediately started crying. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I couldn't speak. She heard me sobbing and her voice shifted to alarm. "Mom, I'm coming over. Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Rebecca arrived with her husband Tom. They found me still at the kitchen table, surrounded by printed screenshots of mugshots, fake profiles, and wire transfer receipts. Rebecca read through everything, her expression shifting from confusion to horror to rage. "Mom, how much did you send him?" $34,000. Saying it aloud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Tom, who works in cybersecurity, took over my laptop immediately. "Patricia, we need to document everything before reporting this. Every message, every email, every phone call record, every financial transaction. This is evidence." Over the next 4 hours, we systematically compiled my entire relationship with Jonathan. The dating app messages, which had disappeared after he'd convinced me to switch to WhatsApp, a red flag I'd ignored. The WhatsApp conversations. The emails with official documents. The wire transfer receipts. The bank statements showing where the money had gone. Tom traced the wire transfers. Every account I'd sent money to was registered to a different LLC with variations of generic names: Professional Medical Services LLC, Healthcare Licensing Solutions, Medical Equipment Suppliers Incorporated. None had legitimate business operations or physical addresses. They existed solely to receive wire transfers, hold the funds briefly, then transfer them to accounts in other states before the money disappeared entirely. "This is a sophisticated operation," Tom said grimly. "These aren't just fake companies. They're layered specifically to make tracing difficult. The money you sent probably moved through 4 or 5 accounts before ending up wherever the scammers ultimately wanted it. This isn't some amateur con. This is professional fraud." Rebecca was researching Jonathan Marcus Reynolds's criminal history. "Mom, according to court records, he's done this before. Multiple times. He was convicted of defrauding 11 elderly women in Florida between 2017 and 2019, posing as an investment advisor. Before that, he ran a fake charity scam. Before that, credit card fraud. He's been in and out of prison since he was in his 20s. I felt something shift from shame to anger. This wasn't my failure. I'd been targeted by a career criminal whose profession was exploiting vulnerable people. The shame didn't belong to me. It belonged to him. "We need to report this," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Rebecca squeezed my hand. "Absolutely. But first, I want you to message him. Tell him you have the next payment ready. Keep him engaged while we contact authorities. Don't let him know you've discovered the truth yet." My stomach churned at the thought of continuing the charade. But she was right. If I confronted him immediately, he'd disappear and move on to the next victim. I typed carefully, "Jonathan, the wire transfer for the controlled substance licensing is ready. $8,500, correct? I'll send it this afternoon. I can't wait until you're finally home. These months of waiting have been so difficult, but knowing we're this close makes it bearable." His response came within minutes. "Patricia, my love. Yes, $8,500 to the account. I'll email shortly. You're amazing. 2 more weeks and I'll be holding you in my arms. Everything we've worked toward is finally happening. I love you." Reading "I love you" from a man who was systematically stealing my retirement savings made me want to vomit. But I typed back, "I love you too. See you soon." Then Rebecca called the Portland Police Department Fraud Division. Within an hour, we were sitting in a detective's office, walking through the entire case. Detective Sarah Morrison listened carefully, took notes, examined our documentation. "Ms. Patricia, I'm sorry this happened to you. Romance scams targeting widows and divorcees are extremely common, and they're getting more sophisticated. The good news is you've documented everything thoroughly. The bad news is that recovering your money will be very difficult. These operations move funds quickly through multiple accounts specifically to make recovery nearly impossible." "I don't care about the money anymore," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I care about stopping him from doing this to anyone else." Detective Morrison nodded. "Then you're in luck. Because if this is Jonathan Marcus Reynolds, and based on the MO, I believe it is, we've been trying to build a case against him for months. He's been operating in Oregon, Washington, and California since his parole ended. We have at least 6 other reported victims, but we haven't been able to locate him or gather enough evidence for charges. Your cooperation could change that. What do you need me to do? Keep communicating with him. Act like you still believe everything. If we can keep him engaged, we can trace his location, monitor his communications, and potentially set up a controlled arrest scenario. Are you willing to do that?" I thought about the other 6 victims Detective Morrison mentioned. I thought about future victims who'd be targeted if Jonathan wasn't stopped. "Yes. Tell me exactly what to do." What I didn't know was that my decision to cooperate would lead to discoveries far more disturbing than a simple romance scam. Jonathan wasn't working alone, and the network he was part of was much larger and darker than anyone had anticipated. Detective Morrison connected me with the FBI's Internet Crime Division within hours. Agent Michael Torres specialized in romance fraud and had been tracking what he called doctor scams, fraudsters posing as medical professionals to exploit victims' trust in the healthcare profession. "Patricia, what you're experiencing is part of a much larger pattern," Agent Torres explained during our first phone call. "We've identified at least 47 active cases across 15 states involving scammers posing as doctors, surgeons, or humanitarian medical workers. Total reported losses exceed $8 million, and those are just the cases we know about. Most victims never report because of embarrassment." The number staggered me. 47 women, all experiencing variations of what I'd gone through. All being told they were special, understood, valued, while being systematically robbed. "The profile your Jonathan used is actually a known template," Agent Torres continued. "Widowed surgeon, working with humanitarian organizations overseas, returning to the US to open a private clinic serving underserved communities. We've seen that exact story used on at least 19 victims. The scammers use it because it hits multiple psychological targets. Medical expertise suggests intelligence and success. Widowhood suggests emotional availability and understanding of loss. Humanitarian work suggests moral character. And the private clinic concept provides endless opportunities for financial requests. How do they know these things will work? Because they've tested them. These aren't random scammers trying different approaches. These are organized networks that analyze what works, refine their methods, and train new operators. It's essentially a franchise model for fraud. Agent Torres asked me to continue my communication with Jonathan exactly as Detective Morrison had instructed, but with additional FBI monitoring. They'd track his digital footprint, IP addresses, phone routing, email headers, cryptocurrency transactions if funds were being converted. Over the next week, I maintained the facade. Jonathan and I talked daily. He sent more official documents for the supposed licensing fees. He described the clinic renovations in detail, even sending photoshopped images of what the waiting room would look like. He talked about our future, trips we'd take, holidays with our combined families, growing old together. Every word was poison wrapped in honey. But I played along, asking questions, expressing excitement, preparing the next wire transfer he'd requested. Then Agent Torres called with a breakthrough. "Patricia, we've traced Jonathan's phone activity. He's not overseas. He's operating from a location in Southern California, likely San Diego or the surrounding area. We've also identified something concerning. His communication patterns suggest he's managing multiple victims simultaneously. We intercepted encrypted messages between him and associates discussing clients, that's you and other victims. They're coordinating to maximize extraction, their term for getting as much money as possible before the victim becomes suspicious." The clinical language they used to describe destroying people's lives was chilling. We weren't human beings to them. We were revenue streams. "There's more," Agent Torres said. "We've connected your case to a previously investigated network run by a woman named Melissa Chen. She's been recruiting recently released convicts, people like Jonathan with fraud histories, and training them in romance scam operations. She provides them with fake profile templates, scripts for different scenarios, access to stolen photos, even coaching on how to handle victim suspicions. It's a full-service fraud operation. Can you arrest her? We're building the case. But we need more evidence. Specifically, we need to catch Jonathan in an act that proves he's knowingly participating in organized fraud. That's where you come in." Agent Torres outlined a plan. I would agree to meet Jonathan in person. He'd been promising to return to Portland for months. The meeting would be the final test. If he showed up, we'd arrest him. If he made excuses and requested more money instead, it would prove consciousness of fraud. I sent the message that night. "Jonathan, I've been thinking. I want to see you before I send any more money. Not because I don't trust you, but because I miss you. Can you come to Portland this weekend? Even for just one day? I need to look into your eyes and hold your hand. Please." The response took longer than usual. Almost 2 hours. When it came, the tone had shifted slightly. "Patricia, I understand completely. I want nothing more. But there's a complication. The clinic inspection is scheduled for Monday, and if I'm not here to meet the inspectors, we lose the occupancy permit and have to restart the entire process. Can you possibly wait one more week? I promise, I'll fly to Portland the moment this inspection clears. We're so close to the finish line." It was the same pattern: promise of meeting, last-minute obstacle, financial urgency. But I pushed harder, following Agent Torres's script. "Jonathan, I need to see you. If this relationship is real, you can make time for one day. Reschedule the inspection. Or I can fly to California and meet you there. Where exactly are you located?" Another long pause. Then, "Patricia, I'm hurt that you're questioning my commitment after everything we've built. I've been transparent about my situation. If you can't trust me enough to wait one more week, maybe we should reconsider this relationship." It was emotional manipulation, turning my reasonable request into an accusation of distrust, threatening to end the relationship if I didn't comply. It was the same tactic he'd used before, but now I recognized it for what it was. "I'm sorry," I typed, playing along. "You're right. I'm just anxious to finally be together. I'll wait. Send me the details for the final payment." His response was immediate, warm again. "Thank you for understanding, my love. $8,500 for the licensing fee, and then we're done. No more obstacles. Just us, building our future together." I forwarded the conversation to Agent Torres. His response: "Perfect. He's committed to the narrative. We're going to let him request the payment, then trace the account he provides. We're also preparing arrest warrants based on your case and 3 others we've connected to him. Keep him talking. But the next development came from an unexpected source. That evening, I received a Facebook message from a woman named Helen Cartwright in Seattle. I saw your name in a romance scam database. Were you involved with someone calling himself Dr. Jonathan Reynolds? I think I'm talking to the same person, and I need help. My hands shook as I read her message. Agent Torres had mentioned multiple victims, but encountering one directly made it viscerally real. I called Helen immediately. She was 64, a retired librarian, widowed 2 years ago. She'd been talking to Dr. Jonathan Reynolds for 5 months. He'd told her the same story: cardiovascular surgeon, Doctors Without Borders, opening a clinic, needed help with licensing and equipment costs. She'd sent $28,000 so far. How did you find me? I asked. There's a website called Romance Scam Victims United. Someone had posted warning about Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, mentioned your name as a connected victim. I'd been feeling suspicious but kept ignoring my instincts. Seeing your name made me finally investigate. Over the next hour, we compared notes. Jonathan had told Helen he was opening his clinic in Seattle. The timeline of his requests matched mine almost exactly. The same progression of licensing fees, equipment deposits, inspection costs. He was literally running the same scam on both of us simultaneously, adjusting only the geographic details. Helen, I'm working with the FBI on this case. Would you be willing to file a report and cooperate with the investigation? Absolutely. I can't believe I fell for this. I'm a librarian. I spent my career teaching people how to research and verify information. And I didn't even Google him until today. You're not alone in that. I'm a teacher who supposedly has critical thinking skills, and I didn't search until I'd already sent $34,000. These people are professionals at manipulation. The shame belongs to them, not us. I connected Helen with Agent Torres. Within days, he'd identified 3 more victims, all in the Pacific Northwest, all targeted by Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, with the same story, all having sent between $15,000 and $42,000. We created a group chat, 5 women who'd been victimized by the same con artist, pooling our information, supporting each other, and coordinating with law enforcement. Our combined evidence painted a comprehensive picture of Jonathan's operation. The timeline of approach, the progression of manipulation, the financial escalation pattern, the accounts used for wire transfers. But the most important discovery came from a victim named Sandra in Sacramento. She worked in banking and had access to fraud detection tools. She analyzed the account numbers Jonathan had provided to all of us for wire transfers. These accounts are all connected, Sandra explained during a group video call. They're registered to different shell companies, but they all have the same authorized signers and the same ultimate beneficiary, a corporation registered in Wyoming called Medical Investment Holdings LLC. I traced the corporate registration. Want to guess who's listed as the managing member? We waited. Melissa Chen. The same woman the FBI told Patricia about, the one recruiting and training scammers. She's not just coordinating the operation. She's directly profiting from it. Every dollar we sent went through accounts she controls. Agent Torres confirmed Sandra's findings. This is the evidence we needed. We can now prove that Melissa Chan is running an organized criminal enterprise. With your combined testimony and financial records, we can build charges for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and RICO violations. This isn't just a romance scam anymore. This is organized crime. The investigation shifted into high gear. Federal prosecutors got involved. Arrest warrants were issued for Jonathan Marcus Reynolds and Melissa Chen. The FBI coordinated with local law enforcement in San Diego to locate and apprehend them. On a Tuesday morning in July, exactly 6 months after I'd first wired money to Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, the FBI executed simultaneous raids in San Diego and Wyoming. They arrested Jonathan at an apartment complex in Chula Vista. They arrested Melissa Chan at her home in Cheyenne. Both locations yielded evidence that would prove crucial to prosecution. Computers containing databases of victims, scripts for different scam scenarios, financial records showing the flow of funds, encrypted communications coordinating operations, and even training materials Melissa had created teaching new scammers how to pose as doctors and exploit victims' medical trust. Agent Torres called me with the news. We got them, Patricia. Both in custody. And what we found is even bigger than we thought. Melissa's network included 17 active scammers operating across 12 states. Identified victims number over 200. Estimated total losses exceed $12 million. Your willingness to report and cooperate has helped us dismantle one of the largest romance fraud networks we've encountered. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted and sad. 200 victims. $12 million. How many lives had been destroyed? How many women were sitting alone right now, wondering why they'd been so stupid, contemplating whether life was worth continuing? But then Agent Torres said something that changed my perspective. Patricia, we need your help with the next phase. Many of these victims don't even know they've been scammed yet. They're still sending money, still believing the lies. We need to notify them, but they're more likely to listen to another victim than to law enforcement. Would you be willing to help contact them? I thought about Helen, who'd found me through a victim database and been saved from sending more money. I thought about the women still trapped in the web of lies, isolated and ashamed. Yes. Tell me what you need me to do. What I didn't know was that reaching out to other victims would reveal something even more disturbing. Some of them didn't want to be saved. And confronting their denial would force me to understand just how powerful the psychological grip of these scams really was. This is getting intense, right? If you're finding value in this story, if it's helping you recognize manipulation tactics, hit that like button and subscribe. You're going to want to hear how this ends. Now, back to the story. The FBI provided me with a list of 53 confirmed victims who were still actively communicating with scammers in Melissa Chen's network. My job was to contact them, introduce myself as a fellow victim, and gently help them recognize they were being defrauded. It was harder than I'd imagined. The first woman I called, Nancy from Ohio, listened to my entire story and then said quietly, "I appreciate your concern, but my situation is different. Dr. Stephen Matthews is real. We've been planning our future for 8 months. He's a neurosurgeon working in Afghanistan. Yes, he's asked for financial help, but it's for legitimate medical needs. I think you were unfortunately scammed, but not everyone online is a criminal." I recognized every word of her denial because I'd said similar things to my daughter months earlier. "Nancy, I understand. But would you be willing to do one thing? Google his name with the word scam and see what comes up. Not because I want to prove you wrong, but because I wish someone had pushed me to do that earlier." She agreed reluctantly. I stayed on the line while she searched. I heard her sharp intake of breath as the results appeared. Oh my God. There are dozens of warnings about this exact name. Other women saying they sent money and he disappeared. How did I not see this? Because he made you feel special. Because the connection felt real. Because when you're lonely, you want to believe in the miracle of finding someone who understands you. There's no shame in that, Nancy. She started crying. I sent him $47,000. My retirement savings. How am I going to survive? We talked for 2 hours. I connected her with Agent Torres, added her to our victim support group, and promised to help her navigate the reporting and recovery process. But not every call went that way. A woman named Diane in Florida listened to my story and became angry. "How dare you contact me to tell me my relationship is fake? You don't know anything about Dr. Marcus Sullivan. We're planning to get married. He's buying me a house. This is real love, and you're just jealous because your relationship turned out to be a scam. Don't project your failure onto me." I tried to explain gently that Dr. Marcus Sullivan was probably part of the same network, that the patterns matched perfectly, that I just wanted to help her avoid what I'd experienced. She hung up on me. 2 weeks later, she called back, sobbing. "You were right. I confronted him about the things you said, and he disappeared. Blocked me on everything. I can't reach him. And I just realized I sent him $63,000 over the past 6 months. I sold my car to send him the last payment. What am I going to do?" The calls continued. Some victims were grateful for the warning. Others were defensive and angry. A few were so deep in the manipulation that no amount of evidence could penetrate their belief in the relationship. One conversation particularly haunted me. A woman named Margaret in Arizona, 71 years old, had been communicating with Dr. William Foster for over a year. She'd sent him $127,000, her entire retirement savings, the proceeds from selling her house, money borrowed from her children under false pretenses. "Margaret, the FBI has arrested the people running these scams," I explained. "Dr. William Foster isn't real. He's a fake identity used by criminals. I'm so sorry, but you need to stop sending money and report this to authorities." Her response was chilling in its calm certainty. "Patricia, I understand why you think that. But William explained to me that there are skeptics who try to interfere with real relationships. He warned me that people might contact me with these exact claims. He said it's because there are so many scams that legitimate relationships get mistaken for fraud. William is real. I know because I feel it in my heart. And I trust my heart more than I trust supposed evidence." She refused to Google him, refused to consider that she might be wrong, refused to contact law enforcement. No amount of reasoning could break through. She'd invested not just her money but her entire sense of self into this relationship. Admitting it was fake would mean admitting she'd destroyed her financial security and lied to her children for a fantasy. That was too devastating to accept. I shared Margaret's case with Dr. Rachel Thompson, a psychologist who'd begun working with our victim support group. She explained the phenomenon. It's called cognitive dissonance. When people make significant investments, emotional, financial, identity-based, in a belief, contradictory evidence actually strengthens their commitment rather than weakening it. Margaret has built her entire world around William being real. Evidence that he's fake threatens her whole sense of reality, so her brain literally rejects the evidence to protect itself. How do we help someone like that? Sometimes we can't. Sometimes they need to hit their own breaking point, usually when the scammer disappears or makes a request so outrageous that it finally breaks through the denial. The best we can do is make sure they know we're here when that moment comes. Agent Torres was building the prosecution case against Jonathan and Melissa. He asked me to testify before a grand jury. I spent hours going through every detail of my relationship with Jonathan. The initial contact, the emotional manipulation tactics, the progression of financial requests, the fake documents, the promises that kept me sending money. The grand jury indicted both Jonathan and Melissa on multiple federal charges: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, interstate transportation of stolen property, and identity theft. The prosecution estimated we could present testimony from at least 47 victims, with financial losses totaling over $12 million. But building the case revealed something disturbing about Jonathan's history. His pattern of fraud went back decades. He'd been arrested and convicted multiple times, served prison sentences, been released, and immediately returned to scamming. Prison hadn't rehabilitated him. It had just given him time to refine his methods. Why does he keep doing this? I asked Agent Torres. He's intelligent, articulate, clearly capable of legitimate work. Why dedicate his life to hurting people? Because it works, Agent Torres said simply. He makes more money scamming than he could make at any legitimate job. And frankly, I think he enjoys the power. Reading his communications with Melissa, he talks about victims like they're game pieces. He gets satisfaction from manipulation itself, not just from the money. That chilled me. I'd thought maybe Jonathan was desperate, maybe driven by poverty or circumstances. But the truth was darker. He was a predator who enjoyed causing harm. The victim support group I'd formed with Helen, Sandra, Nancy, and others had grown to 32 members. We met weekly via video call, sharing our experiences, our recovery processes, our anger and grief and determination to prevent others from experiencing what we'd gone through. Sandra created a comprehensive database documenting romance scam tactics, not just doctor scams, but military, businessman, oil rig engineer, humanitarian worker, and every other profession commonly used. We identified patterns in how scammers built trust, escalated requests, handled suspicion, and disappeared when exposed. Helen started a podcast called Scammed But Not Silenced, where she interviewed victims and experts about romance fraud. The first episode featured my story. Within a week, it had 50,000 downloads and dozens of messages from other victims. Nancy, the first woman I'd successfully warned, became a fraud educator for her state's senior services division. She taught classes at community centers about recognizing scams, verifying online identities, and protecting assets. We were transforming from victims into advocates. But the work that mattered most was direct victim outreach, contacting women who were currently being scammed, trying to break through their denial before they lost everything. Sometimes we succeeded. Sometimes we failed. But every person we helped felt like a small victory against the people who tried to destroy us. Then in September, Agent Torres called with news that would test everything we'd built. Patricia, Melissa Chen's lawyer, has approached prosecutors with an offer. She'll provide detailed information about the entire fraud network: names, locations, methods, financial structures, in exchange for a reduced sentence. This could help us shut down dozens of operations and help hundreds of victims. But there's a catch. She wants to meet with you first. Personally. She says she'll only cooperate if she can talk to one of her victims face to face. The thought of sitting across from the woman who'd orchestrated my victimization made my stomach turn. But I knew this meeting could mean protection for countless others. I'll do it, I said. When? The meeting was arranged for October 15th at the Federal Detention Center in San Diego. Agent Torres accompanied me, along with prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's Office and Melissa Chen's defense attorney. We sat in a conference room designed for attorney-client meetings, windowless, sterile, with a table bolted to the floor. Melissa Chen was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, petite, with sharp features and calculating eyes. She sat across from me and studied my face like I was a specimen under glass. "Mrs. Patricia Wilson," she said. Her voice was educated, almost pleasant. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I didn't respond. I waited. She smiled slightly. "You're angry. That's understandable. But I want you to know something. This wasn't personal. You seem like a nice woman. Educated, kind, probably generous with your students over the years. In another context, we might have been friends." "We're not friends," I said flatly. "You orchestrated the theft of $34,000 from me using lies and psychological manipulation. You trained criminals to exploit vulnerable people. Don't pretend this is some casual misunderstanding." Her smile didn't waver. "Fair enough. Let me be direct. I've built a very successful business over the past 8 years. At its peak, my network included 23 operators across 14 states, generating approximately $18 million annually in revenue. I recruited people with fraud histories, provided them with identities, scripts, and support infrastructure. In return, they gave me 30% of their extraction totals." She spoke about destroying lives the way someone might describe running a coffee shop franchise. "I'm telling you this because the prosecutors want me to cooperate fully," she continued. "They want names, methods, financial records, everything. In exchange, they'll recommend a reduced sentence, maybe 10 years instead of 25. But before I agree, I want to understand something. I want you to explain why what I did is worse than what legitimate businesses do." I stared at her, speechless. "Think about it," Melissa said, leaning forward. "Banks charge predatory interest rates that trap people in debt. Insurance companies deny legitimate claims to maximize profits. Pharmaceutical companies price medications so high that people die because they can't afford treatment. How is what I did fundamentally different? I identified a market demand, lonely people seeking connection, and I provided a product. Yes, the product was fiction, but people pay for fiction all the time. Romance novels, movies, fantasy games. I just delivered fiction personally tailored to individual needs. You stole money, I said. You lied and manipulated and destroyed people's financial security. So do banks when they foreclose on homes. So do credit card companies when they bury fees in fine print. The only difference is they have legal teams that make their exploitation technically legal. I cut out the middleman and kept the profits instead of sharing them with lawyers and shareholders. Her sociopathy was breathtaking. She genuinely didn't understand the difference between regulated business practices and criminal fraud. Agent Torres intervened. Ms. Chen, this philosophical discussion isn't why we're here. You requested this meeting. What specifically do you want from Mrs. Wilson? Melissa turned back to me. I want you to understand that you weren't special. You were inventory. Part of a demographic segment I targeted because analysis showed the highest probability of conversion and sustained extraction. Widows aged 55 to 65, professional backgrounds, stable finances, adult children living independently, active online but not digitally sophisticated. You checked every box. Jonathan followed the script I developed precisely. The emotional manipulation, the timing of financial requests, the fake crisis escalations. All of it was systematically designed based on thousands of previous interactions with your demographic. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice shaking. Because I want you to testify on my behalf at sentencing. I want you to tell the judge that while you were victimized, you understand that I was operating rationally within a system that rewards exploitation. I want you to acknowledge that the real criminals are the economic structures that create the loneliness and financial vulnerability I exploited. The audacity left me momentarily silent. Then I laughed. Not from humor, but from sheer disbelief. You want me to defend you? You want me to tell a judge that you're a victim of the system? After you orchestrated the theft of over $12 million from women whose only crime was being lonely. Yes, Melissa said simply. Because it's true. I grew up in poverty. No opportunities, no safety net. I taught myself coding and business management because I was smart enough to realize the legal economy was rigged against people like me. So I built my own economy, one where I controlled the rules. That's not evil. That's entrepreneurship. It's predation, I said. And I will absolutely testify at your sentencing. But not the way you want. I'll tell the judge exactly what you are, a remorseless criminal who sees human beings as revenue streams and feels entitled to destroy lives because you've convinced yourself everyone else is doing it too. Melissa's expression finally shifted, the pleasant mask cracking slightly. Then I have no reason to cooperate with prosecutors. Without my information, they can't dismantle the larger network. Dozens of operators will continue targeting victims. Hundreds of women will be scammed. Their losses will be on you, Patricia, because you chose revenge over pragmatism. Agent Torres stood. This meeting is over. Wait, Melissa said quickly. I'm not done. Patricia, there's something you need to know. Jonathan is still operating. The room went silent. What do you mean? Agent Torres demanded. I mean he's been communicating with victims from jail using a contraband cell phone. He has 3 active marks right now. One of them is about to wire him $75,000 believing it's for bail money so he can be released and come meet her. He's been telling her he was falsely arrested, that it's all a misunderstanding, that she's the only one who believes in him. I felt sick. Even incarcerated, Jonathan was still destroying lives. Who is she? I asked. Give me her name. Melissa smiled, the pleasant mask back in place. Cooperate with my defense, and I'll tell you. Refuse, and she loses everything while you congratulate yourself on your moral superiority. Your choice, Patricia. Agent Torres and the prosecutors asked for a 15-minute recess. We stepped into the hallway. She's manipulating you, Agent Torres said immediately. This is probably a lie designed to force your cooperation. But what if it's true? I asked. What if there's really a woman about to wire $75,000 to Jonathan right now? Can we verify it? The prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Rodriguez, nodded slowly. We can subpoena Jonathan's jail communications records. If there is contraband phone activity, will the prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Rodriguez, nodded slowly. We can subpoena Jonathan's jail communications records. If there is contraband phone activity, we'll find it. But that takes time. Maybe 48 hours. If Melissa is telling the truth and this woman is about to wire money today, we might not be able to stop it through official channels. Then let Melissa tell me the name, I said. I'll contact the woman directly, warn her, and save her from losing $75,000. Then Melissa gets nothing from me in terms of testimony support. Catherine shook her head. It's not that simple. If Melissa provides information that helps save a victim, her defense attorney will use that as evidence of cooperation and remorse at sentencing whether you agree to testify favorably or not. You'd be giving her exactly what she wants, mitigation evidence, without any guarantee she's telling the truth. But if there's even a chance a real person is about to lose $75,000 today, how can I not try to stop it? Agent Torres put his hand on my shoulder. Patricia, this is why she requested this meeting. She knew you'd feel exactly this way. She's betting on your compassion being stronger than your desire for justice. Don't let her manipulate you the same way Jonathan did. He was right. This was manipulation. Just a different flavor. Melissa had studied victim psychology enough to know exactly which lever to pull. But knowing it was manipulation didn't change the fact that there might be a real woman in real danger. We returned to the conference room. Melissa was waiting, that calculating smile still in place. I need proof first, I said. Before I agree to anything, you need to prove there's actually a victim in danger right now. Give me something verifiable. Melissa glanced at her attorney, who nodded slightly. Her name is Elizabeth Chin. No relation to me. Just coincidence. She's 67, lives in Phoenix, Arizona. She's been communicating with Jonathan for 4 months. He's telling her he was falsely arrested on mistaken identity charges, that his lawyer needs payment to file an expedited appeal, that once he's released he'll come to Phoenix and they'll finally be together. Agent Torres was already typing on his laptop, cross-referencing the information. There is an Elizabeth Chin, age 67, living in Phoenix. She's in multiple scam victim databases as a person of concern. Family members have reported suspected fraud, but she's refused to cooperate with investigations. Melissa continued. Jonathan has been coaching her on how to liquidate her retirement accounts to avoid penalties and taxes. She's planning to wire $75,000 tomorrow morning to a bank account he controls through an intermediary. If you don't warn her tonight, she'll send it by 10 a.m. Arizona time. How do you know all this? Catherine demanded. Because Jonathan and I have been communicating through intermediaries. He thinks I might be able to help him once I'm released. He's been updating me on his operations, probably hoping I'll cut him in on future work. I have screenshots of messages if you want proof. Her attorney handed Catherine a folder. Inside were printed screenshots of messages that appeared to be from Jonathan, detailing exactly what Melissa had described. Elizabeth Chen in Phoenix, the bail money story, the wire transfer scheduled for tomorrow. Agent Torres verified the bank account number Jonathan had provided to Elizabeth. It matched accounts connected to his previous fraud operations. This is real, Agent Torres said quietly. Elizabeth Chen is about to be victimized. I looked at Melissa. If I contact Elizabeth and stop this wire transfer, what do you want in return? I want you to tell the judge at my sentencing that I cooperated, that I provided information that saved a victim, and that while you don't condone my actions, you recognize that I'm capable of doing the right thing when given the opportunity. That's all. You don't have to say I'm a good person or that I deserve leniency. Just acknowledge the facts of my cooperation. It was strategic. She wasn't asking for fake absolution, just acknowledgement that she'd helped, which her defense attorney would spin as evidence of potential rehabilitation. Catherine pulled me aside again. Patricia, legally speaking, this is acceptable. You'd be providing truthful testimony about her cooperation. You're not required to argue for leniency, just state facts. And it could save Elizabeth Chen from devastating financial loss. I made my decision. Fine. I'll testify to those facts, and only those facts, at your sentencing. Now give me Elizabeth Chen's contact information. Melissa provided a phone number and email address. Agent Torres verified them immediately. Both belonged to Elizabeth Chen in Phoenix. I called her right there from the conference room, with everyone listening. An older woman answered, her voice cautious. Hello, Mrs. Chin. My name is Patricia Wilson. I'm calling from California with urgent information about someone you've been communicating with online. Please don't hang up. I promise this is important. How did you get this number? I don't know any Patricia Wilson. I know you've been talking to Jonathan Reynolds. I was involved with him too, Mrs. Chen. He's in jail right now for fraud. The story he told you about false arrest and needing bail money, it's a scam. I'm begging you not to wire him any money. Silence. Then, who told you about Jonathan? Did my daughter hire you? I'm not senile, Ms. Wilson. I know what I'm doing. Mrs. Chin, I sent $34,000 to Jonathan believing the exact same kinds of stories. I'm not calling to judge you or interfere. I'm calling because I wish someone had called me before I lost so much money. Please, just Google his name. Look up Jonathan Marcus Reynolds, arrest record, Florida. See for yourself. Another long silence. I heard typing in the background. Then a sharp intake of breath. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. Is this real? The arrest record, the prior convictions, this is real. Yes. I'm so sorry. But you haven't sent the money yet, which means you can still protect yourself. She started crying. I was going to the bank tomorrow morning. I already filled out the wire transfer paperwork. I was going to send him $75,000. That's everything I have left. I know. But you didn't send it. You're safe. And I'm going to connect you with people who can help. FBI agents, other victims, support resources. You're not alone. We talked for 45 minutes. I added her to our victim support group, connected her with Agent Torres, and promised to check in with her daily. By the end of the call, she'd agreed to file a police report and had cancelled the wire transfer. I hung up and looked at Melissa. I kept my word. I'll testify to your cooperation at sentencing. She nodded, satisfied. Then I'll provide prosecutors with everything they asked for. Names, locations, methods, financial records. Full cooperation. Her attorney and the prosecutors began negotiating the formal cooperation agreement. Agent Torres walked me out of the detention center into the San Diego sunshine. You did the right thing, he said. I know it feels like you gave Melissa what she wanted, but you saved Elizabeth Chen from financial devastation. That matters more than perfect justice. But I wasn't sure. Had I done the right thing, or had I been manipulated again, just by a different predator? Was saving one victim worth potentially reducing the prison sentence of the person who'd orchestrated the victimization of hundreds? As we drove back to the hotel, my phone buzzed. A text from Helen in Seattle. Patricia, we need to talk. I just found out something about the victim support group that you're going to want to hear immediately. Call me when you're alone. The investigation was about to reveal something none of us had anticipated, and it would force me to question everything I thought I knew about who the real criminals were. What shocking revelation was Helen about to share? Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. This story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. Now, back to the story. I called Helen the moment I was alone in my hotel room. She answered immediately, her voice tense. Patricia, I've been researching fraud prevention resources for our victim support group, and I stumbled onto something disturbing. Remember Sandra, the banking professional from Sacramento who helped us trace the financial connections? Of course. What about her? I was reading through some fraud investigator forums, and I found a thread discussing someone who matches Sandra's exact profile and methods. Patricia, there are allegations that she's been using victim support groups to gather intelligence on fraud operations, not to help victims, but to learn techniques and connections that she then sells to other scammers. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. Sandra has been instrumental in our investigation. She's the one who traced the accounts to Melissa Chen. I know. But think about it. How did a bank employee have access to the kind of detailed account information she provided? That level of access would require law enforcement credentials or illegal database breaching. And some of the victims on these forums are saying that after joining support groups Sandra was involved with, they were targeted by new scams that seemed to know details only shared in those private groups. I felt dizzy. Could Sandra have infiltrated our group to learn from us, to study successful fraud tactics from the inside? I immediately called Agent Torres. He listened carefully, then said something that made my blood run cold. Patricia, we've actually been monitoring Sandra for the past 3 weeks. Her financial trace that led us to Melissa Chen was accurate, but we discovered she obtained that information through illegal access to federal banking databases. We've been trying to determine whether she's an overzealous victim seeking justice through illegal means, or something more problematic. Why didn't you tell me? Because we needed to see if she'd reveal her true motives. If she's selling intelligence to scammers, we needed to catch her in the act rather than just charge her with unauthorized database access. Over the next 72 hours, the FBI investigation into Sandra revealed a complicated truth. She had been victimized by a romance scam 5 years earlier, losing $92,000. But instead of recovering and moving forward, she'd become obsessed with understanding fraud operations. She'd taught herself advanced database penetration techniques, cultivated connections with both law enforcement and criminal networks, and positioned herself in multiple victim support groups. But she wasn't selling information to scammers. She was running a vigilante operation, using illegally obtained information to identify scammers, drain their financial accounts through her own hacking skills, and distribute the stolen funds to victims. She'd recovered over $340,000 from various fraud operations and returned it anonymously to victims. It's still illegal, Agent Torres explained. Unauthorized computer access, theft, even if she's stealing from criminals and giving to victims, it's still federal crimes. We have to arrest her. The victim support group was devastated. Sandra had helped so many of us. She'd provided crucial information that led to Melissa and Jonathan's arrests. And now we learned she'd been operating outside the law to do it. I visited Sandra after her arrest, meeting her at the federal detention center where she was being held pending trial. She looked exhausted but unrepentant. I'm not sorry, she said immediately. The legal system is too slow, too bureaucratic, too focused on procedure instead of results. While prosecutors are building perfect cases, victims are losing their savings. I decided to fight back using methods that actually work. But you broke the law, Sandra. You committed federal crimes. And I saved 43 victims from total financial ruin by recovering and returning stolen funds. 43 people who'd lost hope got their money back because I did what law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't do. You tell me which matters more, following rules or protecting people. It was the same question Melissa had posed in different form. Does the system's failure justify operating outside it? But where Melissa had used that argument to excuse victimizing people, Sandra had used it to justify helping them. The problem, Sandra continued, is that the current system is designed to punish criminals after the fact, not prevent harm or recover losses. Romance scam victims almost never get their money back through legal channels. The funds move too quickly through too many jurisdictions. By the time law enforcement freezes accounts, the money's gone. So I decided to move faster. I tracked funds in real time, intercepted them before they disappeared, and returned them. It's illegal, yes. But it's effective. Her defense attorney was building a case around jury nullification, arguing that while Sandra had technically broken laws, her actions were morally justified and any reasonable jury would decline to convict. The legal community was divided. Some argued she was a criminal who'd exploited victim groups for her vigilante crusade. Others called her a hero who'd done what the system couldn't. The situation created painful divisions in our victim support group. Some members, like Helen, felt betrayed that Sandra had infiltrated the group under false pretenses and used illegally obtained information. Others, like Nancy, argued that Sandra had recovered money for victims and deserved support, not prosecution. I found myself caught in the middle. Sandra had broken laws, but she'd also helped me and dozens of others. She'd provided the intelligence that led to Melissa and Jonathan's arrests. Without her illegal database access, we might never have made those connections. The case became national news. Victim turned vigilante, when fraud survivors fight back outside the law. Victim advocacy groups were split. Law enforcement universally condemned Sandra's methods. But polls showed public sympathy. 68% of Americans surveyed said they'd be willing to serve on a jury that acquitted Sandra despite clear evidence of her crimes. Then the situation took an unexpected turn. The FBI discovered that Sandra's hacking hadn't just targeted accounts connected to romance scams. She'd also accessed databases containing personal information about law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges involved in fraud cases. She claimed it was to verify they weren't corrupt or connected to fraud networks, but the implications were chilling. She crossed a line, Agent Torres said during a meeting with our victim group. I understand the frustration with how slowly the system works. I understand the desire for vigilante justice. But Sandra accessed information about federal judges' families, prosecutors' children, agents' home addresses. That's not fighting fraud, that's gathering intelligence that could be used for intimidation or worse. Sandra's attorney insisted she'd never intended harm, that she was simply being thorough in her investigations. But prosecutors argued that someone with Sandra's skills and access to sensitive information posed a genuine security threat. The trial was scheduled for November. Sandra faced up to 15 years if convicted on all counts. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. Plead guilty to reduced charges, accept 5 years in prison with possibility of early release, and agree to never access computer systems beyond her authorized permissions again. Sandra rejected the deal. If I'm going down, it'll be because a jury of my peers decided I'm wrong. Not because I folded under pressure. Meanwhile, Melissa Chen's cooperation with prosecutors was yielding massive results. Using her information, the FBI arrested 21 additional scammers across 12 states. They dismantled fraud networks in California, Texas, Florida, New York, and Oregon. They identified 347 additional victims and recovered $2.7 million in frozen assets. But every arrest revealed another layer of complexity. Many of the arrested scammers were themselves exploitation victims, undocumented immigrants who'd been recruited by fraud networks with promises of legitimate work, only to be forced into operating scam operations under threat of deportation. Young people with criminal records who couldn't find legitimate employment and saw fraud as their only economic option. Even some romance scam victims who'd lost so much money that they'd been recruited to work off their debt by helping scam others. The simple narrative of good victims versus evil scammers was dissolving into a much more complicated reality about economic desperation, systemic exploitation, and the blurry line between victim and perpetrator. Jonathan Marcus Reynolds's trial was scheduled for December. Prosecutors had overwhelming evidence, testimony from 47 victims, financial records, intercepted communications, the contraband cell phone records showing he'd continued scamming from jail. They were confident of conviction and seeking a 25-year sentence. But Jonathan's public defender was building a defense around his addiction and mental health issues. My client has severe gambling addiction and untreated bipolar disorder, the attorney argued in pre-trial motions. His fraud wasn't motivated by greed, but by compulsive behavior he couldn't control. He needs treatment, not decades in prison. It was hard to feel sympathy for Jonathan, but his attorney had a point. Jonathan had been in and out of prison since his 20s, each release followed quickly by new fraud charges. Clearly, incarceration alone wasn't working. Was 25 more years in prison really the answer, or was it just society's way of hiding a problem we didn't know how to solve? These questions haunted me as I prepared to testify at Jonathan's trial. I'd written my victim impact statement, detailing the financial and psychological harm he'd caused. But I'd also started researching alternatives to incarceration, restorative justice programs, mandatory treatment combined with supervised release, restitution requirements that would force offenders to work legitimate jobs and return stolen funds. The week before Jonathan's trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from him, sent through his attorney. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Dear Patricia, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to understand that when I was talking to you, parts of it were real. I did lose someone important to me. I do understand grief. I used that real emotion to make the lies more convincing. I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I just want you to know that you weren't wrong to feel connection. I felt it too. I just prioritized my addiction over your well-being. That's on me. I hope someday you can trust someone again without this experience poisoning it. You deserve that. Jonathan, it was manipulation, obviously. Another attempt to make me sympathize, to soften my testimony, to make me question my anger. But it was also possibly true. Con artists don't necessarily fake every emotion. They just prioritize their needs above their victims' well-being. I didn't respond to the letter. But I did revise my victim impact statement to include something I hadn't originally planned. Jonathan Reynolds caused me severe harm. But I also recognize that he's a human being trapped in destructive patterns he's never been given the tools to escape. I want him held accountable. But I also want him given real treatment, real rehabilitation opportunities. Not because he deserves it, but because the cycle of incarceration and reoffending clearly isn't protecting future victims. We need better solutions. I didn't know if my words would matter. But I knew I needed to say them, for my own healing if nothing else. What kind of justice would ultimately be served? The trials were about to reveal whether the system could handle the complexity of modern romance fraud. Jonathan's trial began on December 3rd. The federal courthouse in San Diego was packed with victims, media, and curious observers. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by Helen and Nancy from our support group. We'd traveled together to face the man who'd targeted all of us with variations of the same scam. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented 47 victim testimonies, financial records showing Jonathan had netted over $1.8 million personally from his fraud operations, expert witnesses explaining the psychological manipulation tactics, and recorded jail phone calls where Jonathan discussed continuing his operations even while incarcerated. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at Jonathan. He sat at the defense table in a suit his attorney had provided, looking nothing like the distinguished surgeon from the photos. He was ordinary, middle-aged, slightly balding, unremarkable. That ordinariness was somehow more disturbing than if he'd looked obviously criminal. I described our relationship in clinical detail, the dating app match, the progression of emotional intimacy, the requests for money, the excuses and delays, the discovery of his real identity. I read portions of messages he'd sent me, letting the jury hear his words about grief, partnership, and future dreams, all lies designed to extract maximum financial damage. The prosecutor asked me about the psychological impact. Ms. Wilson, beyond the financial loss, how has this experience affected you? I'd prepared for this question, but actually answering it in open court with Jonathan watching was harder than I'd anticipated. He made me doubt my ability to trust my own judgment. 4 months after I discovered the truth, I second-guessed every relationship, every interaction. I questioned whether I was intelligent enough to navigate the world without being exploited. He didn't just take my money, He took my confidence in myself. Then came the defense attorney's cross-examination. She was gentler than I'd expected. Ms. Wilson, you mentioned in your victim impact statement that you recognize my client is trapped in destructive patterns. Can you explain what you meant? I meant that punishing him without addressing the underlying issues that drive his behavior won't protect future victims. He's been through the criminal justice system multiple times. It clearly hasn't worked. I want him held accountable, but I also want interventions that might actually change the pattern. So you support treatment and rehabilitation opportunities for my client? I support whatever actually works to stop him and people like him from victimizing others. If that's treatment combined with accountability, yes. The defense attorney smiled slightly. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. No further questions. I realized she'd used my compassion to support their argument for reduced sentencing. I'd been manipulated again, differently, but effectively. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Jonathan guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, multiple counts, identity theft, and interstate transportation of stolen property. The judge scheduled sentencing for January. Melissa Chen's sentencing came first, in late December. I attended and fulfilled my promise to testify about her cooperation. I kept it factual. She had provided information that helped save Elizabeth Chen from losing $75,000. She had given prosecutors intelligence that led to 21 additional arrests. She had cooperated fully once she decided to do so. The prosecutor argued for 20 years. Melissa's attorney argued for 8. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison with eligibility for release after 10 with good behavior. As they led her from the courtroom, Melissa caught my eye. She didn't smile or acknowledge me beyond that brief look. I wondered if she felt any remorse, any recognition of the harm she'd caused. Or if she still saw us as inventory, and this was just a business loss. Sandra's trial was scheduled for February. The public attention on her case had intensified. Victim advocacy groups had split, some calling her a criminal who'd exploited victim communities, others calling her a hero who'd done what the system couldn't. A crowdfunding campaign for her legal defense had raised over $200,000. I struggled with where I stood. Sandra had broken laws, but she'd also helped people. She'd operated outside the system, but the system demonstrably wasn't working for victims. Was she a criminal or a symptom of a broken system? I visited her again before her trial. Sandra, why did you really infiltrate our support group? Was it to help us or to use us? She was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, both. I wanted to help victims because I remember how desperate I felt when I lost my money. But I also wanted access to intelligence about fraud operations so I could strike back. I used you, Patricia. I'm sorry for that. But I don't regret the results. What happens if you go to prison for 15 years? Was it worth it? I recovered money for 43 people who thought they'd never see it again. I helped dismantle networks that were destroying lives. If the price for that is my freedom, then yes, it was worth it. I left that meeting more conflicted than ever. The criminal justice system was supposed to be about accountability and public safety. But Sandra's case revealed its limitations. Punishing someone for illegal methods that achieved more victim protection than legal ones didn't seem like justice. It just seemed like institutional self-preservation. Jonathan's sentencing came in mid-January. The prosecution argued for the maximum, 25 years. The defense argued for 10 years. With mandatory treatment for gambling addiction and bipolar disorder. They presented expert testimony about how Jonathan's mental health issues and addiction had driven his criminal behavior, how incarceration without treatment would just continue the cycle. I gave my victim impact statement, reading the version that called for accountability with rehabilitation. Several other victims gave theirs, some calling for maximum punishment, others echoing my call for treatment-focused interventions. The judge considered for 2 days before announcing the sentence. 18 years in federal prison with mandated participation in mental health and addiction treatment programs. eligibility for early release after 12 years if Jonathan completed treatment successfully and maintained clean conduct. It was more than the defense wanted, less than the prosecution sought. Jonathan would be in his 80s before release. Part of me felt that was appropriate. Part of me wondered what 18 years of incarceration would actually accomplish beyond removing him from society. After sentencing, Helen, Nancy, and I sat in a coffee shop processing everything. "Do you think any of this makes a difference?" Nancy asked. "Melissa got 15 years. Jonathan got 18. Sandra might get more. But there are thousands of other scammers out there doing the exact same thing right now." She was right. While we'd focused on getting justice in our individual cases, the romance scam industry continued growing. New victims were being targeted every day. New operators were being recruited. The problem was far bigger than any individual prosecution could address. "So what do we do?" Helen asked. That question led to a decision that would transform our victim support group into something much larger and much more controversial. In February 2025, our victim support group, now called Scam Survivors United, made a pivotal decision. We'd been reactive, helping victims after they'd been scammed. Now we needed to be proactive, preventing scams before they happened. Helen, who had technology background, proposed creating an AI-powered verification system. "We have documentation of thousands of scam profiles, messages, photos, and tactics. What if we built a database that people could query before sending money? They'd upload photos, messages, or profile information, and our system would flag whether it matches known scam patterns." Nancy suggested partnering with dating apps directly. "They have more data than we do. If we could convince them to implement fraud detection at the platform level, we could prevent matches between scammers and potential victims before relationships even start." I proposed public education campaigns targeting the demographics most vulnerable to doctor scams: recently widowed women, divorced professionals, anyone experiencing major life transitions. The shame around being scammed prevents people from reporting or seeking help. If we can normalize talking about it, we break the isolation that scammers exploit. Over the next 3 months, we worked frantically to build these initiatives. Helen recruited computer science students from University of Oregon to help develop the verification system. Nancy negotiated with representatives from Match.com, eHarmony, and other dating platforms. I organized a speakers bureau of victims willing to share their stories at community centers, senior organizations, and professional groups. The FBI supported our efforts, providing access to their fraud databases, within legal limits, and connecting us with other victim advocacy organizations working on similar issues. Agent Torres introduced us to a philanthropist who'd lost his mother to a romance scam and wanted to fund prevention work. He donated $500,000 to establish Scam Survivors United as a formal non-profit organization. But not everyone supported our work. We started receiving threatening messages, anonymous emails warning us to stop interfering with people's livelihoods, social media harassment from accounts defending scammers as just trying to survive in an unjust economy, even a few physical threats that required police involvement. One message particularly disturbed me. "You think you're heroes. You're just bitter women who can't accept that nobody actually wants you. The men who scammed you did you a favor by making you feel desired. You should be grateful, not vengeful." The cruelty revealed something important. There was a whole community online that viewed romance scam victims with contempt, that blamed us for being desperate and stupid, that saw our advocacy work as buzzkill interference rather than protection. This victim-blaming culture made our work harder. Potential victims who saw these attitudes internalized the shame, making them less likely to seek help or report suspicious relationships. We needed to combat the stigma as much as the scams themselves. In April, we launched our first major public campaign, "Love Shouldn't Cost Your Life Savings." We created videos featuring 20 victims from different demographics, young and old, different races and backgrounds, varying education and professional levels, all explaining how they'd been targeted. The message: anyone can be victimized. Scammers are professionals at exploitation, there's no shame in being deceived. The campaign went viral, generating over 5 million views in the first week. But it also generated backlash. Conservative media outlets ran segments criticizing us for creating victim mentalities and infantilizing women by suggesting they can't recognize obvious scams. Progressive outlets criticized us for not addressing the economic desperation that drove people to fraud in the first place. We couldn't win. Helping victims made us controversial from every ideological angle. Then in May, Sandra's trial resulted in conviction on all counts. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for unauthorized computer access, wire fraud, and related charges. The judge acknowledged her noble intentions, but emphasized that vigilante justice couldn't be tolerated regardless of motivation. Sandra's conviction sent a chill through the victim advocacy community. If someone could be imprisoned for illegally helping victims, how far could we go legally without crossing into criminal territory ourselves? Our AI verification system launch was scheduled for June. But a week before the planned rollout, we received a cease and desist letter from a coalition of tech companies. They argued our system violated terms of service agreements by scraping data from their platforms. They threatened legal action if we proceeded with the launch. We consulted attorneys. The legal landscape was murky. We were likely protected under fair use and First Amendment principles, but defending against. Lawsuits from major tech companies would bankrupt our organization before we could prove our case in court. This is deliberate suppression, Helen said angrily during an emergency board meeting. These companies profit from user engagement. Romance scams keep people on their platforms. They talk about safety, but they don't actually want effective fraud prevention because it would reduce their metrics. She was probably right. But recognizing corporate hypocrisy didn't change our practical situation. We couldn't afford a legal battle with billion-dollar companies. We had to pivot. Instead of launching a platform that scraped data from existing sites, we created a voluntary submission system. Victims or potential victims could upload information about suspicious profiles, and our AI would analyze it against known scam patterns. It wasn't as powerful as our original vision, but it was legally defensible. The modified system launched on June 15th. Within 72 hours, we received over 10,000 submissions. People checking potential romantic partners, family members verifying their relatives' online relationships, even dating app users proactively screening their matches. Our AI flagged 1,347 submissions as high-probability scams, based on matching known patterns. We contacted all 1,347 submitters with detailed warnings and resources. Several called back to thank us. We'd stopped them from sending money, saved them from financial devastation. But others were angry. You're destroying real relationships based on algorithms. My boyfriend isn't a scammer just because he fits some pattern. This is invasive and wrong. We couldn't force people to accept our warnings. All we could do was provide information and hope they'd use it wisely. Then on June 23rd, I received a call from Agent Torres. Patricia, we need to meet. Something's happened that you need to know about. It involves Jonathan. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? He's in federal prison. Not anymore. He was released 3 days ago on a technicality. His conviction was overturned on appeal due to procedural errors during trial. He's free, Patricia. And according to our intelligence, he's already reactivated his fraud operations. The room seemed to spin. Everything we'd fought for, the trial, the conviction, the 18-year sentence, had been erased by legal technicalities. Jonathan was free to continue targeting victims as if nothing had happened. How is that possible? His attorney found that prosecutors had failed to properly disclose certain evidence to the defense during discovery. It's a technical violation, but it was enough for the appeals court to overturn the conviction and order a new trial. The prosecutors are working to bring new charges, but that could take months. In the meantime, he's out on bail. Is he allowed to use the internet? Technically, no. His bail conditions prohibit computer use. But we both know that's unenforceable. Patricia, I'm calling because we've intercepted communications suggesting he's specifically targeting women who testified against him at his trial. Some kind of revenge operation. We think you might be one of his targets. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Jonathan was free, likely operating under a new identity, possibly targeting the very women who'd helped convict him. After everything we'd been through, we were potential victims all over again. What would happen when predator and prey crossed paths one final time? Agent Torres arranged immediate protective measures. My home security was upgraded, I was given a panic button device, and local Portland police were notified to increase patrols in my neighborhood. But the most chilling part of Agent Torres's warning came at the end of our conversation. Patricia, Jonathan knows you're running a victim advocacy organization. He knows you're publicly visible. And based on intercepted messages, he views you as the primary reason his conviction happened. If he's planning retaliation, you're the most likely target. The other victims from Jonathan's trial were notified and offered protection. Most accepted. Helen and Nancy both upgraded their security systems and varied their daily routines to avoid predictability. But I refused to hide. Scam Survivors United was launching its first national conference in July, a gathering of victims, law enforcement, tech platforms, and policymakers to address romance fraud systematically. I'd been planning it for months. I wasn't going to cancel because Jonathan wanted revenge. Then we use you as bait, Agent Torres said bluntly. You continue your normal activities, and we monitor for any approach from Jonathan or associates. We set up surveillance, undercover agents, the full operation. If he comes for you, we grab him. It was risky. But it was also an opportunity to stop Jonathan permanently rather than waiting months for a retrial that might result in another technicality-based release. I agreed to the plan. Over the next 3 weeks, I maintained my regular schedule: speaking engagements, media interviews, work at the Scam Survivors United office. Every moment, I was aware of FBI agents shadowing me, cameras monitoring my movements, the panic button in my pocket ready to activate. But Jonathan didn't make contact. No messages, no approaches, no indication he was watching. Agent Torres started wondering if the intelligence about revenge targeting had been wrong. Then on July 10th, 3 days before the conference, I received a LinkedIn message from Dr. Andrew Harrison, trauma psychiatrist. The profile was sophisticated, complete work history, publications, professional connections, even recommendations from supposed colleagues. The message read, Ms. Wilson, I've been following your advocacy work with great interest. As someone who specializes in treating fraud victims' psychological trauma, I'd love to discuss potential collaboration. I'm particularly interested in speaking at your upcoming conference about the mental health impacts of financial exploitation. Would you be available for a brief call to discuss? It seemed legitimate. But something nagged at me. I forwarded the profile to Helen, who ran it through our verification system. 30 minutes later, she called, her voice tight with tension. Patricia, that profile is fake. The photo is stolen from a real psychiatrist in Boston. The work history is fabricated. The publications don't exist if you actually check the journals. And the recommendations are from other fake profiles. This is a scam approach, probably from Jonathan. I immediately contacted Agent Torres. He traced the IP address the LinkedIn message originated from. It bounced through VPN servers but ultimately traced back to a location in Portland. Jonathan was in my city. This is the move we've been waiting for, Agent Torres said. He's trying to establish contact, probably to build trust before suggesting an in-person meeting. We need you to respond, Patricia. Play along, set up a meeting, and we'll be there to arrest him. My hands shook as I typed the response. Dr. Harrison, thank you for reaching out. I'd be very interested in discussing collaboration. Are you available for a coffee meeting this week? His response came within minutes. I'm actually in Portland for a conference. Would tomorrow work? There's a cafe near your office. Coffee Culture on Stark Street. 3 p.m. I confirmed the meeting. Agent Torres and his team spent the next 24 hours preparing. Plainclothes agents would be positioned throughout the cafe and surrounding area. I'd wear a wire. The moment Jonathan revealed his identity or made any threatening move, they'd move in for arrest. The next day, I arrived at Coffee Culture at 2:45 p.m. The cafe was moderately busy. Perfect cover for the 6 FBI agents scattered among the customers. I ordered tea and sat at a table near the window, my panic button in my jacket pocket, the wire taped under my shirt. At 3:05 p.m., a man entered the cafe. He was in his 50s, dressed casually, wearing glasses I didn't remember from Jonathan's photos. But when he approached my table, I recognized the voice immediately. Ms. Wilson? Dr. Andrew Harrison. Thank you for meeting me. It was Jonathan. His voice, his speaking patterns, even subtle mannerisms I'd learned from hours of phone calls. But he was pretending we'd never met, maintaining the fiction of being a psychiatrist interested in collaboration. Please sit down, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. He sat, smiling pleasantly. I've been so impressed with your advocacy work. The conference you're organizing seems particularly innovative. Tell me more about your vision for it. I played along, describing the conference plans while wondering what his actual agenda was. Was he planning to harm me? Manipulate me into a new scam? Simply toy with me as some kind of psychological revenge? Then he said something that made my blood run cold. You know, Ms. Wilson, I find it fascinating how trauma victims often become advocates. It's almost like they need to transform their victimization into purpose. Otherwise, they'd have to confront the reality that they were simply marks who fell for an obvious con. Tell me, is your advocacy work about helping others, or is it about managing your own shame? He knew exactly who I was. This wasn't a scam approach, it was a confrontation. Who are you really? I asked quietly. He smiled wider. You know who I am, Patricia. Just like I know you're wearing a wire right now and there are federal agents positioned throughout this cafe. Did you really think I didn't anticipate this? Agent Torres's voice came through my hidden earpiece. Move in. Now. But before the agents could reach our table, Jonathan stood calmly. This has been enlightening. I just wanted you to know that you haven't won anything, Patricia. I'll beat the new charges just like I beat the last ones. Technical errors, procedural violations. There are always loopholes. I'm better at this than you are. I always will be. 4 agents converged on him. He didn't resist, just smiled as they handcuffed him. See you at trial number 2, Patricia. Try to be more entertaining as a witness this time. They led him out of the cafe. I sat frozen, shaking, unable to process what had just happened. He'd known it was a trap and walked into it anyway, just to prove he wasn't afraid of me, of the FBI, of consequences. Agent Torres sat down across from me. Are you okay? He knew. He knew everything and came anyway. Why would he do that? Because this is a game to him. He gets off on the power, on proving he's smarter than everyone. The money is secondary. What he really craves is domination, the thrill of manipulation. By walking into our trap, he thinks he demonstrated that he's in control even when he's being arrested. Is that why he targets victims? For the power. Partly. But also because he genuinely doesn't see you as human. You're puzzle pieces to him, challenges to solve. Your suffering doesn't register as real. I went home that evening exhausted and disturbed. We'd arrested Jonathan again, but he was probably right that he'd find some way to beat the charges. The system wasn't designed to stop someone who understood its weaknesses and exploited them as skillfully as he exploited people. The Scam Survivors United Conference proceeded as planned 3 days later. Over 800 attendees, victims, law enforcement, tech representatives, policymakers. We shared research, strategies, personal stories. We launched new initiatives, a federal legislative proposal for stronger romance fraud penalties, partnerships with dating platforms for better verification systems, a national public awareness campaign. But the most powerful moment came during the closing session. I stood on stage and told the truth. Jonathan Reynolds was arrested again 2 days ago. But he'll probably find a way to avoid real consequences, just like he has multiple times before. That's demoralizing. It feels like injustice. But here's what I've learned. We can't control whether individual predators are punished. All we can control is whether we transform our pain into protection for others. Every person we warn, every victim we support, every system we improve, that's a victory. Not perfect justice, but real impact. The audience stood and applauded. Many were crying. We'd all been through variations of what I'd experienced. We'd all been betrayed, manipulated, financially devastated. But we'd all chosen to fight back instead of disappearing into shame. After the conference, Helen, Nancy, and I sat in my hotel room, processing everything. What do you think actually stops people like Jonathan? Nancy asked. I'd been thinking about that question for months. I don't think anything stops them. I think we just make it harder for them to operate, costlier to continue, riskier to target victims. We chip away at their effectiveness until the next generation of scammers decides it's not worth the effort. That's pretty bleak, Helen said. Maybe. But it's also realistic. And realistic hope is more useful than false optimism. My phone buzzed. A text from Agent Torres. Jonathan's new bail was revoked. Judge cited the cafe meeting as violation of bail conditions. He's in custody pending new trial. This time we'll get it right. It was something. Not justice, not closure, but something. A small victory in a very long war. And sometimes, that has to be enough. Jonathan's second trial took place in November 2025, almost 2 years after I'd first wired him money believing he was a humanitarian surgeon. This time, prosecutors were meticulous about procedure, leaving no room for technicalities or appeals based on errors. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 62 victims testified, 30 more than the first trial, as Agent Torres's investigation had continued identifying women Jonathan had targeted. The financial damage totaled over $2.4 million across 5 years of operations. I testified again, but this time it felt different. I wasn't shaking or uncertain. I looked at Jonathan calmly and described in clinical detail how he'd exploited my grief, manipulated my compassion, and stolen my savings. He stared back, that same small smile playing on his lips, like this was all just an amusing game. The jury convicted him on all counts after 8 hours of deliberation. At sentencing in December, the judge showed no leniency. Mr. Reynolds, you are a career predator who views human suffering as entertainment and other people's pain as profit. You've shown no remorse, no capacity for change, no recognition that your actions destroy lives. I'm sentencing you to 23 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. 23 years. Jonathan would be in his mid-80s when released. It was as close to justice as the system could provide. Melissa Chen served her sentence without incident. Reports from the prison indicated she'd become a model prisoner, teaching computer skills to other inmates, even participating in a restorative justice program where she'd written letters of apology to some of her victims. I never responded to the one she sent me. I didn't trust that her rehabilitation was genuine, and I didn't owe her absolution. Sandra's story took an unexpected turn. After serving 18 months of a 12-year sentence, a federal judge granted her compassionate release based on new evidence that she'd recovered over $400,000 for victims and had been operating with genuine intent to help rather than personal profit. She was released with 10 years of supervised probation and banned from computer use beyond basic email and communication. I visited her after her release. She was thinner, harder looking, but somehow more at peace. I don't regret what I did, she told me. But I understand now that I was operating from rage, not justice. I wanted to hurt the people who'd hurt me, and I dressed it up as helping victims. The line between those motives was thinner than I admitted. What will you do now? I asked. I'm going to work within the system this time. Use my skills legally. Maybe that's less satisfying than being a vigilante, but it's sustainable. And honestly, I'm tired of being angry all the time. Scam Survivors United continued growing. By 2026, we had chapters in all 50 states and partnerships with law enforcement agencies internationally. Our verification system had flagged over 45,000 suspicious profiles. We'd provided support to more than 8,000 victims. We'd recovered $3.2 million through coordinated legal efforts. But the work felt endless. For every scammer we helped put in prison, 10 more started operating. For every victim we saved, 20 more were being targeted right now. The romance scam industry was estimated at $1 billion annually in the US alone, with growing sophistication enabled by AI, deepfakes, and cryptocurrency. Still, we kept fighting. What else could we do? 2 years after the cafe confrontation with Jonathan, I was invited to speak at the FBI Academy in Quantico about victim psychology and fraud investigation. Standing in front of 200 federal agents, I shared everything I'd learned about how manipulation works, how trauma affects judgment, how shame silences victims, how the system often re-traumatizes people it's supposed to help. At the end of my presentation, a young agent asked, "Ms. Wilson, after everything you've been through, do you still believe in online dating? Do you think people should trust potential romantic partners they meet on apps?" I thought about the question carefully. I believe people should trust cautiously. Verify before investing emotionally or financially. Recognize red flags. Listen to loved ones who express concerns. But also, yes, I still believe human connection is possible and worth pursuing. Jonathan didn't destroy my capacity for trust. He just taught me to be more thoughtful about how I extend it. That night, alone in my hotel room, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I opened a dating app. Not to actively date. I wasn't ready for that yet. But just to prove to myself that I could. That Jonathan hadn't taken everything from me. I looked at profiles with clear eyes, noting generic descriptions, suspicious photos, vague job details. I recognized the patterns I'd been blind to before. Knowledge was armor, even if it wasn't perfect protection. I closed the app without messaging anyone. But I'd opened it. That was something. The next morning, flying home to Portland, I received an email from a woman named Jennifer in Tampa. "Ms. Wilson, I think I'm being scammed by someone claiming to be a surgeon. I found your TED Talk online and recognized every pattern you described. I haven't sent any money yet. Thank you for sharing your story. You just saved me from making a terrible mistake." I forwarded her email to our victim support coordinator and smiled. This was the work. Not perfect justice, not complete victory, but real people protected from real harm. One at a time, case by case, victim by victim. Jonathan was in prison. 3 years after I'd first Googled Jonathan's name and found his mugshot, I received an unexpected visitor at the Scam Survivors United office. It was Elizabeth Chen, the woman from Phoenix I'd saved from wiring $75,000 to Jonathan while he was in jail. She'd flown to Portland specifically to meet me. "I wanted to thank you in person," she said, crying. "You saved my life, Patricia. Not just my savings, but my actual life. I was planning suicide if that money was gone. You gave me a reason to keep living." We hugged for a long time. 2 strangers connected by trauma, transformed into allies by choice. "What are you doing now?" I asked. She smiled. "I'm a volunteer with the Phoenix chapter of Scam Survivors United, helping other women recognize scams before they lose everything. Turning my almost mistake into protection for others. Just like you taught me. That's the legacy. Not revenge, not perfect justice, but transformation. Pain into purpose. Victims into warriors. The work continues. If you or someone you love is in an online relationship with someone you've never met in person, especially someone claiming to be a doctor, surgeon, or medical professional, please watch for these red flags. Requests for money for medical equipment or licensing fees, inability to video call clearly, dramatic emergencies requiring immediate payment, and pressure to keep the relationship secret. Share this story widely. Romance scams thrive in silence and shame. They collapse under awareness and community support. Visit scamsurvivorsunit.org to verify suspicious profiles, report fraud, or get support if you've been victimized. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Together, we protect each other. Comment below. What warning signs stood out most to you?